Hi everyone, as I sat down to write my so-called decade, it occurred to me that when looking at any period in history, the beginnings of the story, the events that shape it, often begin much earlier. And my so-called decade is no different. A few months back I was sorting through various areas of the house under the delusion of grandeur that I was going to live a more decluttered lifestyle. One could say that process is ongoing. I did discover a photo. I forget how I found it. Now I'd love to describe it being found under a small pile of dusty paperbacks I was searching through like out of a movie, with a suitably dramatic soundtrack playing in the background, but it was probably more mundane than that. What was true is the photo held my attention for 30 seconds. Like a zoom transition followed by a slow lingering camera shot, it brought me back to a specific place and time. The photo looked relatively innocuous. A face-on shot of two people enjoying a bit of time at the beach. Even a simple photo, intouched by a modern digital editing, can lie convincingly. You see, I didn't look unhappy in that photo, but I was profoundly unhappy. I was unhappy because I was unemployed. I'd found myself working for a small startup in 2008, a role which itself wasn't doing wonders for my lifetime earnings, and it wasn't the best place to be when the financial crisis hit. This meant I was hit with a period of intermittent employment for 2 years, covering 2009 to 2011. Over the course of those 2 years, I was out of work for a total of a year. This was a psychological challenge rather than a true catastrophic financial one, as while I was never going to lose the house, end up on the street, or anything truly life-ruining, it was hard because it hit me directly in my psychological Achilles heel at the time. Anyone who's followed the channel for a while knows I spend outrageously conservatively, and I'm financially risk-averse. Some would say relative to my financial position. So not having an income hits me hard. I was also a very different person back then, and my self-identity was well and truly wrapped up in what I did in my career. Inevitably, the result was a high level of stress and a significant drop in my self-worth. Was I officially depressed? It's hard to say. I've heard stories of what being depressed is like, and I've seen my brother go through a period of serious depression, and on that basis I would quite safely say that no, I wasn't officially depressed. But I did reach a point where I'd be walking on the beach during the day, taking a break from soullessly looking at job sites, vainly trying to identify roles I'd convinced myself I was a perfect match for, even though I knew the applications would go into an empty void. I'd momentarily think if I walked into the sea and never came back out, I wouldn't have to deal with the situation anymore. Now, whoa, let's stop and pause for a moment. I thought it. It was never remotely entertained as something I'd act on. Not even close. I'm a very self-reflective person with some might say a ridiculous verbose internal monologue. So the fact I was processing these things through in some form of internal narrative is in no way connected to real world action. But the fact such a plot entered my head in even an abstract scenario was telling. But where I was from 2009 to 2011 is important because it's the foundation of this serial we are about to embark on. And one could say the critical background to the central protagonist as he steps over the threshold into the dramatic tale. This is especially true in the first half. I found my self-worth by undertaking a grandiose education adventure which changed me irrevocably. The nature of my career and the jobs I now see as valuable changed due to the education and the hand that reached out to pick me out of my career disruption, kickstarting 3 years of doing something very different. My wife was like a rock during that period. It was her who was working consistently. It was her who remained positive, even though sometimes I didn't want to hear it. Yet by midway through this tale, we'll be divorced. Sometimes I wonder if the seeds for this crazy transformative so-called decade weren't sown in 2009 and 2011, but actually in 2004. This is how the narrative of life weaves its long-form tale, even without you actually realising it, until major events shock you into realising the epic foreshadowing that wasn't obvious in the moment. Previous to 2004, my life, and at the point our journeys became one in 1996, also my wife's, was like an ocean liner cutting majestically through the ocean. I'd gone from school, to college, to university, to good jobs, and finally sat at head of IS for an international shipping company, which I grew with over time, and I'd spent 8 years in that role. We then had the delusion of grandeur of migrating to Australia. The germ of this idea came from my wife, and she largely sustained it, but in no way was it only her idea. I was fully complicit in this madness. It wasn't exactly a bad idea, but I can recognise in who I am now that I wasn't truly ready for that, in who I was then. The idea was sound, but life experiences had not dealt me a set of cards to make that a reality that I could deal with, process and work through. As a result, at the tail end of 2004, we found our majestic ocean liner had run aground and was like the cast from Lost. We found ourselves confused and cast adrift, but without the idyllic surroundings. Technically, we were homeless that Christmas in 2004 and living at my wife's parents'. While we thought we'd got away with it in early 2005 and we'd recovered across home and career, the decision came back to hit us in 2006 and I chose a start-up job when I faced unemployment. And by 2009, we are back to where this chapter begins. So there you have it. The foundations of this so-called decade were probably laid when we self-sabotaged our potentially majestically blessed life, by reading that to mean it could continue unabated in a foreign country when really we didn't have the life skills to pull it off. It would have a dramatic repercussions a decade later in 2015 as life choices, each one small or sensible big choices you think at the time, build up upon each other. So the stage is set, now we step over the threshold and like some sort of mild-mannered hero, I start my journey through my so-called decade. Until the next chapter, you can support me by doing a few simple things. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, certainly post a comment, and let's continue to make small great changes to make life a story worth telling.